Sometime recently, a video surfaced on my recommends of notable Canadian Twitch streamer Northern Lion, and he was playing this coin flipping game. And his chat was complaining, and he was fighting with them, and I thought like, haha, that's funny. That's a good bit, because that's not a real game. But isn't it though? Game is called Unfair Flips, and in it you click a button to flip a coin. And if you land on heads 10 times in a row, you win. It's what they call a incremental game nowadays, which is to say, there are some very simple, numerical kind of upgrades. The longer you play, the more you can improve your odds, until getting 10 flips becomes much more likely than at the beginning of the game. You could graciously label this minimalist. It is about as simple as a game can be. There is no strategy, there is no skill, there is no chance of failure, you do not learn anything as you play the game, you flip, you flip, you flip. But sometimes you get heads, and sometimes you get heads again, and a little note plays and your brain releases dopamine. Now forget everything you know about the coin flip game, because that is not as simple as a game can be. We can go simpler. Imagine a game with a red button on a table. You may choose to press the button or not press the button, and if you press the button, you win the game. I'm going to call this a red button game. Is the red button game a real game? The more I think about this button, the more I think about unfair flips, the more I see them everywhere. When I'm playing a JRPG and I just spam fight to get through all the encounters, when I boot up an auto battler or a walking simulator, a visual novel or an idle game, when I know a game so well, it's like it's playing itself. I started to get really lost in the sauce here. I started to wonder if there were any games that couldn't be reduced to click here to win. So I posed the question, is the red button game a real game? It's complicated. I don't want to get bogged down here, but there is no widely accepted academic definition of what is or isn't a game. Every scholarly source I can find that even attempts to define games spends 2 to 4 pages waxing on about how difficult and futile an exercise it is. If you have a definition that admits golf, Dead or Alive Beach Volleyball, Sudoku, and Nordic LARP, it's really difficult to draw any meaningful guardrails about what does and doesn't qualify as a game. Notwithstanding the fact that some people would disagree about whether puzzles or races or collaborative storytelling are games at all, in the conventional sense. One of the definitions that's often considered close enough is, a game is a system in which players engage in an artificial conflict defined by rules that results in a quantifiable outcome. There are some valid criticisms of this definition, notably, it arguably excludes collaborative storytelling games such as Dungeons & Dragons, sandbox games with no definitive goal or endpoint such as Minecraft or Dwarf Fortress, and it also excludes so-called zero-player games such as the Conway's Game of Life. But the red button game does not fall into any of these exclusions, so with this definition we can hopefully agree that the red button game has most of the characteristics of a game. It has rules, it has different outcomes, those outcomes are influenced by player actions. A twist on this definition I particularly like was coined by Distraction Makers, a YouTube series/podcast, which highlights a particular distinction that the previous definition is missing that I think is very important. A game must have meaningful decisions, uncertain outcomes, and measurable results. And of course, right? Those games I mentioned all have something in common that's not included in the first definition, and it's something that's not included in the red button game. Uncertainty. Connect 4, bear with me, Connect 4 is a game in which players take turns sliding colored discs into a 6x7 vertical grid. We all know Connect 4. Connect 4 has rules, it has different outcomes, and they are influenced by player actions, 2 players are in direct conflict, and the outcome is uncertain. Connect 4 is clearly a game. It is an archetypal game. It is the most game-shaped game a game can be. But Connect 4 has been solved. Like the red button game, a player with a full understanding of Connect 4 can guarantee a win if they are in the first player chair, and the second player can do nothing to stop it. The red button game has two possible outcomes, but only one outcome guarantees a win. So this is baby's first game theory. If we accept that the player will act rationally, and that they will act in their own best interest, and that the player understands the rules of the game, there is only one possible outcome. They will always press the button. In Connect 4, there are 7 possible opening moves, but since the playboard is mirrored, it's actually 4 opening moves. But only one move, the middle, puts you in a position where you could guarantee a win, regardless of what the other player chooses on their turn. So the player's experience, again, behaving rationally, trying to win, and understanding the game, is that there is only one move, the move that will win you the game. Click here to win. The only real difference between Connect 4 and the red button game, both solved games that play out in exactly the same way every time when played optimally, is the effort required to reach that optimal solution. In Connect 4, there are 4.5 trillion potential board states. In the red button game, there is 1. So there is a huge extra possibility space to play in with Connect 4, with uncertainty before the game becomes solved. In other words, it's highly replayable. The red button game is not replayable. After a couple of iterations, you've explored its possibility space fully. To put it another way, there are 2 characteristics of the red button game that make it very easy to solve. The first is that every time you play the game, it's the same. Every game starts the same, the player's input is the only thing moving the game state forward, and the player makes the same decision every game, the game will always play out the same. The second is that the game is simple. There are so few game actions required to win the game, 1 in fact, that optimal heuristics, which is to say the rules a player can follow to influence a desirable result, are easily learned and easily memorized. In this case, the heuristic is, if you want to win, push the button. So I've been speaking about solved games, but solvability is actually more of a spectrum. The red button game is trivially solved. A game like Tic Tac Toe is somewhat easily solved. Connect 4 is very difficult, but it is still a solved game. And games like chess and Go have the same characteristics as Tic Tac Toe, but they have so many more permutations that they are only theoretically solvable. Not solved yet, but I think it's possible that we might see chess solved in my lifetime. So if some games are more solvable than others, I can't help but ask, what knobs exist for a game designer to increase or decrease the solvability of a game? Can you unsolve a game at the design layer? And can you make a game unsolvable? Can you make something infinitely replayable, like truly, literally infinite, not just very complex like Go? Well, the red button game is easy to solve because it's simple, and because it's always the same. So to make it unsolvable, you would need to change one or both of these characteristics, and there are 3 primary methods that we have of doing so. The first is complexity, the second is randomness, and the third is interactivity. The first means of unsolving a game is simply by adding systemic complexity. This can be done in one of 2 ways: increasing the player options or increasing the player actions. These often, but not necessarily, both increase as a game gets more complex. So a common way of visualizing this concept is called a game tree. Each vertical layer represents a decision point in the game, a single game action, and by increasing the number of game actions, you increase the height of the game tree. So a game with few actions, Tic Tac Toe maxes out at 9, has a shorter game tree than one with lots of actions, like Connect 4 at 42. The branching nodes represent the total number of available options when a player needs to take an action, so increasing a player's available options increases the width of the game tree. For instance, in Connect 4, we've already covered that you have 4 choices on your first turn. Depending on what you choose, your opponent will have a new suite of options, down and down and down until one player wins the game. Because the game tree can expand in 2 dimensions, complexity grows at an exponential rate when you increase both the number of actions taken in the game and the options available to a player at any given time. Back to Connect 4, let's reduce it to a 4x4 grid. This game is much more similar to Tic Tac Toe now. It's easier to solve and it's more prone to draws. Because every time a player acts, they have fewer choices to choose from, and there are less potential overall choices in the game before the board is filled. If you increase the size of the board vertically only, the game gets more complex to solve because there are many more actions required before the game ends. There's more time to set up and resolve complex strategies and gambits. The game tree gets taller. If you increase the 4x4 board horizontally, in that case you're increasing the options and the actions. Not only do you have more actions to execute strategies, you have more options at each individual decision point. Extremely high systemic complexity can make a game tree so complicated and so large that it becomes functionally unsolvable. But this comes at the risk of alienating players. If you look at Go, the game tree is unfathomably large, and that makes beginner heuristics very difficult to figure out. A common player experience in Go is just not understanding the strategic difference between basically any decision into the mid or late game when some clearer patterns have been established and the number of viable choices has been reduced. Chess suffers from this less, not necessarily because it has a sometimes narrower game tree, but because the difference in pieces makes clearer the division between strong and weak moves. The fact that a queen is obviously more highly valued than a pawn means that you can easily develop some beginner heuristics. Even first-time players are likely to understand that trading a pawn for a queen is a good move in most situations. Individual player tolerances for systemic complexity are extremely variable. There is a thin envelope of satisfying complexity between a game being easily solvable and a game being unplayably frustrating. That said, complexity can't make a game truly unsolvable. It can approach infinitely close to unsolvability as it becomes more and more complex, but at the cost of making a game infinitely close to unplayable as well. The next tool in the unsolvability tool belt is randomness. And for this, let's return to unfair flips. Unfair flips, the coin flipping game, is the red button game plus randomness. Right? Every time you click the button, it may be heads, bringing you closer to winning, or it may be tails, resetting your progress. On the face of it, this adds uncertainty, which should make the game less solvable and more exciting. But in practice, the player's experience of the game is exactly the same. The player will always flip the coin. The introduction of randomness didn't make it any less solvable or any more complex. For randomness to be meaningful, it must be able to influence player behavior. If the player is not able to influence or react to the outcome of randomness, it does not have a material impact on the game's solvability. If you just add randomness, you just create a slot machine. Luck Be a Landlord is a slot machine that is also a game. The game is a roguelike. Before every pull, you get one or more choose 3 prompts with various options to improve the potential payout of your slot machine. Pure choose 3 roguelikes, such as Luck Be a Landlord, are red button games elevated by their randomization. The game gives you a choice of 3 upgrades, then you push the button, it gives you 3 upgrades again, then you push the button again. It's a perfect example of randomness in action because all vestigial gameplay elements have been removed. It's just choose 3, pull the handle, choose 3, pull the handle. If you navigate the complex web of possibilities and you get lucky, you can win the game. However, the random aspect of the game is so complex, there are so many potential options and so many combinations and orders they can appear in, optimal heuristics for the game, similar to chess and Go, exist only in the realm of theoretical possibility. That said, in every possible choose 3 spread, one of the 3 choices is best. There is an optimal path through every randomized run, and that means it is technically solvable, just heavily obscured. So similar to adding complexity, randomness does not unsolve a game. And just like complexity, randomness has its own trade-offs. If the depth and impact of a random system is too low, simple heuristics can be developed to solve even a highly randomized game. Take Blackjack. This is a game built around randomness that still has very powerful heuristics that can be used to tilt the odds slightly in your favor, practically guaranteeing net wins over a long enough timescale. And if you exercise more powerful heuristics, like counting cards, you'll find yourself banned from the casino. On the flip side, if a random system is too deep or too impactful, any heuristics the player forms don't feel meaningful. Even if you play optimally, your choices may be frequently undermined by random chance. Randomness, though, is a very economical way of making a game less solvable without alienating the player when compared to complexity, because randomness can take an enormous game tree and trim it down for the player. In Luck Be a Landlord, there may be 10 million possible combinations of 3 that the game may select as my first choice, but I only ever need to react to a choice between 3. That being said, neither complexity nor randomness has yielded a literally unsolvable game, so that leaves one strategy remaining. The final potential way we have of unsolving a game is interactivity, but it's not looking good. Tic Tac Toe and Connect 4 have already demonstrated that 2-player interactivity doesn't necessarily make a game unsolvable. In a 2-player, zero-sum, turn-based game, which is to say, one winner, one loser, the game tree is larger than an equivalent single-player puzzle, but it is not unsolvable as long as the possibility space remains finite. But that is not the only type of interactivity. If a game contains more than 2 players, and those players can directly interact with each other, then this game will almost invariably involve politics. Just look at a game like Super Smash Bros., a game that most people would consider maybe strategically light. It's a 4-man brawl, and one player is clearly in the lead. Every player can see who's winning. Every player knows that they need to attack the leader, otherwise the leader is likely to maintain their advantage. But they also know that by attacking the leader, any player would reduce their individual chances of winning by a great deal. The optimal play for each of the 3 non-leaders is to somehow get the other 2 to attack the leader and hang back, conserving their own resources. But if all 3 hang back, the leader can continue to dominate, picking them off one by one and winning the game. In this case, for any of the losing players to have a chance, some of them need to play suboptimally, which obviously they're not going to want to do. The losing players must agree to all gang up on the leader, splitting the risk equally, and as a group they are incentivized to do so, but individually they're still incentivized to each hang back, betraying the group. But if 2 or more of them betray the group, they're in the same losing position they started with. These types of prisoner's dilemma style paradoxes come up all the time in political games. Even this very common and simple decision point in Super Smash Bros. Becomes very complicated when trying to understand and weigh the motivations of everybody involved, and the personalities of those players. Anybody who's played this kind of game already knows it will play out in dramatically different ways depending on the players involved, depending on the actions that took place in the previous games, and depending on just the general mood of everybody. There is something essential here that a system or a random number generator cannot replicate. This is the key benefit of interactivity. Human players trying to navigate complex systems can behave inconsistently, but in sometimes predictable ways. In this one way, interactivity, unlike randomness and complexity, contributes to pure unsolvability. Other players cannot be trusted to behave optimally. They get confused, they get impatient, they make mistakes, they act on emotion. Even assuming perfect play, a complex enough system gives them room to lie and to bluff, and to learn. They see your patterns and they adapt to them. This is why games that want you to play for thousands of hours, like live service games, are highly interactive and often multiplayer with large numbers of simultaneous participants. With the internet, you can get served up a new combination of players every single game, and you can never predict how they will behave. Infinite replayability. Heuristics that are always changing, metas that are always evolving, even just a little bit game by game as players bluff, predict, and adapt. Poker, a game that combines complexity, randomness, and some highly limited interactivity, is a largely solved game. It's so solved that broadcast poker, remember broadcast poker, displays the probabilities right on the screen. But the top players can still smoke somebody who's just memorized the probabilities. And that's because high-level poker is about eking out an incremental advantage through highly randomized and mathematically solved games through very limited interactions with their human opponents. And that's what makes it fun. It's not the probabilities, it's not the random number generator, it's the people. I've played poker, not well, and I've played Poker Night at the Inventory, which is a poker game against AI opponents, and while Poker Night at the Inventory is a satisfying kind of sketch comedy narrative experience, it's not poker. Single-player experiences can be amazing, both when the computer emulates your opponents, like in an RPG, or in truly one-directional experiences like puzzles or time trials or narrative experiences where the gameplay is intentionally left surface level. I'm not disparaging solved experiences. The act of solving it can be part of the fun. There can be art embedded within them, and the design itself can be art. That said, I still think there's a meaningful distinction here. AI opponents, like the one in Poker Night or practically any other game, to be put in the terms of this video are complexity and randomness, manifest through code and masquerading as interactivity. They cannot make a game unsolvable in the same way a person can, because they're not a person. You could create a perfect poker playing or Dead or Alive Beach Volleyball playing robot that makes optimal decisions in every possible scenario and exceeds the human limit in response time, dexterity, and memory. But that robot is still a system. A very complex system with sophisticated algorithms and highly granular RNG, creating a game tree that's unfathomably deep, but a theoretically solvable system nonetheless. A simulacrum. A poor substitute for a partner or a community. And I think we can feel this as players and as humans. Anybody who's ever played an online team first-person shooter knows that playing with bots sucks, right? It's a self-evident truth, and it has nothing to do with how good the bots are. This is a brutal left-hand turn for the video, but we should be wary in these interesting times of any tool that claims to replace human interaction in this way. Not simulate human interaction, but replace it. Bots are only getting more convincing. Nvidia is building an Elden Ring playing AI right now for some reason. NPCs are going to generate dialogue on the fly, and AI dungeon masters are already running tabletop RPGs. We're talking to our AI therapists about our AI girlfriends. A poor substitute for a partner or a community. Interactivity isn't a magic bullet. It doesn't automatically make a game better, and it doesn't unsolve a game on its own. But it is special. It shapes games in unique and irreplaceable ways. If a game has enough systemic complexity or randomness to support a complex game tree, that's where ambiguity, competition, bluffing, gambits, and politics can live. Only a human opponent can do those things. But when they get to, I think that's when a red button stops being just a button. If you're still watching, bravo, amazing, good job. I don't know if that conclusion was comprehensible given the topic and where I started, but that is the journey that Unfair Flips sent me on. So here we are. You took it with me. This YouTube channel is a bit of a new project for me, so a like, a subscribe, or a comment would be extremely encouraging. If you found this video interesting, I do have more scripts that I'm working on about the design and history of games, specifically with a focus on RPGs. I know this wasn't really an RPG video. Stay beautiful, stay hydrated, peace out, bye-bye.